All right, we've looked at the objects. We've especially torn apart the cube. And what we're going to do now is we're going to start adding some physics and looking at how we can make these things interact in the game world, but kind of like what we would expect to have them interact um, in real life. So we're going to look at this cube, and what we're going to do is we're going to start applying physics to this cube. Now, will physics comes in many flavors, and it will allow the cube to interact with the world around it. So the physics tab is the last tab over here on the right hand side. Now when you click on this, and if you get this physics tab, it means you're in the wrong engine. This is in Blender Render, we need to go to Blender Game and watch over there what happens when I change to Blender Game. This gives us the appropriate physics tab for what we want to do. Now by default it comes up as static, meaning basically I come over here, I hit play, nothing happens. I have no collisions, I have no nothing. It's just something in the game just is surrounding fluff. But I can change that. If I change this to an actor, add collision bounds, now things can interact with it. It's just like a static boulder or a static wall or brick, whatever you want it to be. But it doesn't move, but it will still interact with the game. So that's what static will give you. Then we're going to come up here to character. Character now gives you a few other options. We can still have our collision bounds. We'll still have it as an actor. But now we have step height, jump force, so we can actually jump how fast we're going to fall from a jump, the maximum number of jumps we can take. So we can do a little bit more, just a little bit more than static. Now when I hit play here, you notice the cube just falls because now we have some natural physics to this. So things are going to fall. So from here on out, what we're going to look at with physics, things will fall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a plane under this so I won't fall. So I'm going to go to create and plane. Now what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to set it up, push it in here, kind of get it centered here. And then I'm going to scale it. And I'm not going to scale it real big. I'm just going to scale it big enough to be able to house what we're doing. And I'm actually going to take my cube and pull it up a little bit too. So now when I go to play, it now falls and stops. It rests on that plane. Now with collision bounds, we're working with a box here. So our collision bounds, having it as a box, works quite well. But we can have collision bounds of all sorts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another object. I'm going to add a cone. And the cone we have, I'm going to go ahead and try to see where my plane is and set this cone down. And it's kind of underneath there, so I'm going to move my box over and pull my box up a little bit. And I'll look at it, 7 is a top view, so we're pretty much squared away. 0 is a camera view, and then we have our other views. All right, so what I'm going to do here is now I'm going to hit play. And you notice that that box, that cube, just rests right on that point. And that's kind of what you get with character. There are some physics, but they're not realistic physics. So let's go to something else. Dynamic. Dynamic is another type of physics, and you can see we've added a lot more. We can add mass. So if we're doing a physics calculation out of our physics book, we can take all of that information and put it in here, and it will act the same way. We can lock translations, meaning we can lock this on the X, Y, or Z axis only, so that's all it can do. Again, it has collision bounds, and we can choose our collision bounds. But again, when I hit play, it falls and it rests right on that cone. Kind of cool. We have some other things involved here. Linear velocity, dampening, things that is nice for this, deals with whether it's going to slide, how fast it's going to fall, what it's going to do when it hits. But it's still kind of unrealistic. The most realistic dynamic we have is something called rigid body. Again, not much has changed. Still have collision bounds. Now I can lock rotation. I could lock the translation, but now I can lock rotation. That's about the only thing that has changed. But now what happens when I hit play, now it kind of acts like a box would. So let me push this. I'll put that back a little bit, and now it should fall forward. Oh, so I'm not back enough. So it falls forward and it kind of slides. So now we have some other things to deal with. But this makes it act much more like something real. So when we're looking at physics themselves, there are several. There's no collision, but static. That's just going to be a tree in the background, whatever. We have dynamic and we have character, which are very similar. Now with those two, when we press play, the character will fall, so there is some mass to it. But then we have rigid body that gives us the most ability. Now let's look at a few other things here. Rigid body, we've got it as an actor. If I press ghost, and several of these have ghost, things can go right through it. And it can go right through everything. So ghost is kind of neat if you need it to pass through something or be a specific state. But did you see how it fell right through the plane as well? Now the plane, I've selected the plane. The plane we can actually have as a collision bound as well. We can make that an actor. So now when we go and I hit play, it still passes straight through. So be careful with ghost. Ghost is on my cube. Be careful with ghost. Sometimes people get going with things and they don't realize they've checked ghost, and their object falls through everything and they don't understand why. So from here, we're back to just straight up rigid body, and it acts pretty much like it should. You can change the mass. You can change the radius. The radius of this, and okay, so you can't see the radius. The radius basically is round on the inside, and that's why sometimes when you press play, it seems like it almost is ready to roll. And if this was at an incline, it probably would roll, or it would slide. So we need to look at dampening. So dampening, if I push dampening way up and I hit play, what is that going to do? It slides a lot less. Rotation, if I put rotation all the way up. A lot of these things, it's fun. It's just going to almost go. So let's pull rotation back a little bit. See, now it's starting to act even more like a regular box. So depending on what your needs are for your game, I would strongly suggest to come in here, figure out which type of physics you want, whether it be static, dynamic, character, or rigid body, and play with some of these settings and see what they get you, because there's no one size fits all with this. All of these will have different ways of interacting with the game depending on how you set them up. So what we looked at specifically are physics, and specifically physics for the cube, but all of these physics apply to every one of the mesh or primitives that Blender has. So again, get in, have some fun with this, and just have a happy blending day.